It's difficult to say what I'm about to say, but I can't do that forever. I didn't want to be in that role forever of getting Jack through the day. And so that can be hard for young moms to hear because you think, oh, I just want to do this forever, or I have to do this forever. You won't and you don't. There's other seasons for us out there.
Welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism. I'm Bridget Shipman, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to be talking to Carrie Cariello, and Carrie is the author of What Color is Monday? And someone I'm with has autism, and also her new book, Half My Sky. She is also a contributor to the Huffington Post, Today Parents, The Today Show, Parents.com, Love What Matters, and Grown and Flown. She has been interviewed by NBC Nightly News and has given a TEDx talk. She speaks regularly about autism, marriage, and motherhood, and writes a weekly blog at carriecariello.com. One of her essays, I Know What Causes Autism, was featured as one of the Huffington Post's best, and her piece, I Know Why He Has Autism, was named one of the top blog posts by the Today Show. Enjoy this interview. Welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism. I'm Bridget, your host, and I'm really excited to have a fellow co-writer. Was a compilation. You guys have heard me talk about Superheroes on the Spectrum book. And Carrie Cariello is our guest today. We're going to be visiting about some of the great work that she has done for our community. So I think you're going to enjoy this interview. So welcome to Mother's Guide Through Autism, Carrie.
Thank you. It is a delight to be here and to meet you.
Yes, same here. So I always like to start out with how you got here, right? So if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about your personal
Mhm.
uh, journey with autism, and tell us, of course, about your lovely son, Jack, and his autism diagnosis.
Absolutely. So my name is Carrie. I'm married to my husband's name is Joe. He's a dentist, and we have 5 kids. My oldest, Joseph, similarly named to yours, is about to be 21. Jack is 19. My middle son, Charlie, is 18, about to go off to college. I have one girl, Rose, and she's 16. And then my youngest, Henry, is 15. Jack was diagnosed when he was 18 months old. So it was quite some time ago. And I remember longing for someone who was a few steps ahead of me on this journey, for a mom that was maybe 3 or 4 years in front that could say, well, this is what you can expect. And, give me some idea of what to anticipate. So as I've become that mom, I call it the old mom. I'm sort of the old mom now. I feel a responsibility to some degree to share our story in a way that can resonate with people and they can take from it what they will.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what so many of us moms do. And I, like you, I'm I guess a veteran really, because
Oh, I
my
like that. Yeah.
yeah, Joseph's 31. So I've been around a while, and I think that that feels really good at this point for me as well. So I totally get what you're saying. I did a grief series on this podcast because I do believe that there is so our listeners range, right? We've got moms that just are newly diagnosed with their kids to, adults like me, with Joseph. But I like to ask this question because for those moms, we want to offer them hope. What can you tell me about that moment you got the diagnosis, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, it's one of those what I call core memories because it's connected to such a strong emotional sensation that it's something, I'll never forget. Jack was pretty young in terms of getting a diagnosis at that point in time. Autism was not widely known. Personally, my only experience was from the movie Rain Man. That's all I knew about autism at that time. This was 2005.
Yeah.
So I remember being in the doctor's office. We had had a lot of evaluations, and specialists pointed out all sorts of vulnerabilities, right? He never had what's called joint attention. So he would never point to a bird in the sky and then try to get your attention towards it. Obviously, some significant speech delays, eye contact, repetitive motions and movements. But it still took the better part of 6 months to land us in a developmental pediatrician's office. And even then, it wasn't the hallmark symptom of autism that he observed. It wasn't what we typically think of, right? Like head hitting or downcast eyes. It was a moment in time where Jack was whirling around, and the office was very tiny, whirling and whirling as I tried to interface with the doctor. And all at once, he slammed his shin on the corner of a metal filing cabinet, just really hit it hard and fell to the ground screaming. And I went over and knelt by him to try to comfort him, and he rejected me. And the doctor said, and these are words I will never forget. He said, "Does he ever come to you for comfort?"
Mm.
Me. And it was like crystal clear at that point that we were looking at something fairly significant. And I remember walking back out into the parking lot with little Jack, a little guy, and he was wearing overalls. And I just thought, I knew something, that this was significant for us, even if I couldn't quite capture how. Yet at the same time, we thought, my husband Joe and I thought, oh, he'll outgrow this. We're going to get therapies. We're going to do all the right things as parents, and this one day will be behind us. And I always say, naivete is often our friend. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
grief, I mean, to really answer the question you asked, is grief. It visits perpetually. I don't think it's the grief aspect is ever behind us as mothers. I'm sure you experienced that as a mom of an adult. My grief changes. I compare autism grief to heartache by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not enough to make you stop what you're doing or maybe have a breakdown about it or cry about it even. It's just something you notice. For me recently, it's when I see kids Jack's age, 19, sort of pursuing a traditional life trajectory, maybe flirting with a girl
Yeah.
in the parking lot at the school, or driving. Jack doesn't drive, or even just bouncing a basketball, which is something Jack has never had any inclination to do.
Yeah. It's that those moments where and I talk about this too. It's just like 1 second you're just fine, and then something like that, like, oh, you notice another kid his age, and then all out of nowhere you just go, oh my gosh, okay, kind of catch your breath, and then of course we move on. But I think it's always there. um I've been on this journey for 31 years, almost 32 now with Joseph, because right off the bat he was showing signs. Of course, I didn't know anything either. That was a long time ago when autism was not prevalent, or we didn't know very much about it. And so I think I get a lot of questions, right? So you have Jack, and then you have 4 other children. And I get this question a lot, like, how do you manage a big family? And how do you do it? It's
Mm.
amazing, by the way. But how do they interact with Jack? I mean, I know a lot of listeners, Joseph has a younger brother. I get asked a lot, well, how does Jacob interact with Joseph? How does that work?
Yeah, it's probably one of my top questions, right behind puberty. What's
Yeah.
puberty like? And
Right.
and marriage. And so I have two answers for that. People ask me a lot too, how did you make sure your kids got the attention that they needed? I had a young mom ask me this once, and it was one of those I didn't even think before I answered. I said, worry less about the attention your kids get and more about the attention your marriage gets,
Mm.
because they will find a way to get what they need from you. They absolutely will. But a marriage will fall to the background, and it can happen really quickly. And the second thing is, I mean, yeah, people are always curious. I think they want sort of to see what the house looks like on the inside, right? How the kids interact with him. And um, you have 5 kids or 2 kids or 3 kids, however many, and you just think, oh, they're all going to be pretty much the same. They came from the same people. They were raised within the same home with the same value system. And I will tell you, I could not have 5 more different kids than I do.
Yeah.
I also like to say I compare autism to a bowl of jelly beans in our home, and each of my children has reached in and plucked out one piece of candy for themselves, where Jack sort of took handfuls. And by that, I mean each one of them struggles with a vulnerability that could be kind of related back to autism, even though no one else is diagnosed. My oldest son is, and I write a lot about that in my book, I'll hold up Half My Sky.
Yes, which we're going to talk about
Yes.
a lot more. Plus your other two. I want to make sure we get to those because
Thank you.
yeah. But go ahead. Yeah,
In
you wrap
here,
in.
yeah, this book is a series of letters to people in my universe, and each I write a letter to each child in it too, and it was a great way for me to explore um, their relationship a little deeper. So Joseph and Jack are 13 months apart. So autism has been the background of my oldest son's landscape forever, really, and he's the leader of our family. The letter to him, I call it the letter I never wanted to write, and it's a letter saying, take care of him. You know, we're going to take care of him financially. He'll be set up in housing and all of that. Make sure he's not alone on Christmas Eve. Throw him I know. Look at me.
I know. Don't cry, don't cry, but I think I might.
Yeah, it's okay. I
That's
am. Throw
beautiful.
him a
It's
50th birthday
beautiful.
party, right? Right. All those little things that I'm filling in for now. So I had a guy at the gym. This is like an aside in my town, and I've talked to him before. He has 4 kids, similar to mine, and he read the book, which was kind of random. And he walked up to me on the treadmill. He was just crying. He said, "I never ever thought about that." He said, "It absolutely leveled me. The idea of having to ask one of your kids in a really specific way to take care of each other." And I'll tell you what my oldest did for him. My oldest provided a vision for Jack to live by. Jack is currently in a college program. People sometimes say, why do you say college for your oldest and college program for Jack? And I'm really upfront about that. I never want to pass off Jack's progress as more than it is. In other words, Jack's program is very, very scaffolded. There are teams around the clock keeping him moving forward, right? I don't want to give the impression that, oh, he walked out the door and he shed autism like a skin and anxiety like a caterpillar. It's simply not our reality. I didn't know what Jack's future after high school would look like until we dropped my oldest son off at college in Philadelphia. So Jack's a very tactile person, meaning he touches things, he sees things, even though he has good eyesight, he sees things through his fingertips first. And I watched him walk around the dorm room, my oldest son's dorm room, and he traced the bed frame and he ran his hands over the desk. And I thought, watching him, I thought, he's seeing this for himself. For the first time, he's thinking, this is what a dorm room looks like. This is what it looks like to move. And in the next week, we started to look for programs. So I say that Joseph is sort of our beacon in that way. He was the one who, because he rode the big bus, Jack wanted to ride the big bus. He's sort of like, without even knowing it, without any intention whatsoever, sort of gently nudged Jack along further in this journey than he probably would have gone otherwise.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about, so my 18-year-old Charlie, he's on my lives a lot. He's a kid who's never, ever met a stranger. He's the only one with dark hair and dark eyes like my husband. And something beautiful just before I came on this podcast happened where Jack has been asking Charlie to drive up and spend the weekend with him. And so Charlie cleared his weekend. Charlie's a busy dude and he captain of baseball and all that stuff. And he said, I made it happen. I made it happen. I cleared the weekend so I could, yep.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm feeling it.
because all you ever wanted was your kids to get along
Yeah,
and enjoy each other.
that's it.
And here's Charlie going to a program for neurodiverse people, like going to visit his brother. And he's letting Jack take the lead. I said, well, what are you guys doing? He said, oh, there's a Mansfield, a hall event where they're gonna we're all going to the movies. We're all going to see Kung Fu Panda.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he just makes room for him in such a beautiful way. My daughter in the book, she just read her chapter a couple days ago, actually. And I said, my daughter is my most serious. She is the least playful of my kids, and she internalizes a lot. And I said, did I get it right? And she said, yeah, you got it right. And so that was important to me. In the book, I liken her to the proverbial canary in the mine because
Yeah.
she reads everyone else's energy before she reads her own. And sometimes this comes at a cost to her. And the example in the book I use is when in our high school they watch the movie, they read and then watch of Mice and Men. All of them had a very difficult time where by the time it was Charlie, I could anticipate it and I called the school and said, this is just too close to our story. And I don't think it's fair to ask them to publicly watch it, And I forgot to do that for Rose. And she came home inconsolable, inconsolable. Because if anyone knows the story of Mice and Men, it's by Steinbeck. It's a classic, and it talks about, a compromised grown man who's oversized, who's tall. Jack's almost 6'6", and how the world interacts with him. And she came home. She hadn't seen the ending yet. This is so my daughter in a nutshell. I said, I'm calling. We'll get you out of it. There's no need for you to be on display watching that. And the teachers were beautiful about it. And I said, you don't even have to watch the ending. We can do it together. We can do it another time. She sat up in her room on her phone and watched it. She said, I had to see the ending for myself and by myself.
Yeah.
But she carries that with her. What if something like that ever happened to Jack? And I have to remind her, he has a family. He
Yeah.
has a sister. So often I worry she doesn't remember her own oxygen when it comes to life with her
Yeah.
brother.
I can relate to that, and I don't have a sibling like that, but it's easy when you are naturally a nurturer and a caregiver. It's easy. It's very easy to forget about you. And
Yes.
thank goodness she has that heart, right?
It's
Um,
beautiful.
yeah. And I want you to hold that book up again and say the name again, because after who's not going to want to read this?
Thanks.
Half My
Half
Sky.
my sky. And this is a photo. We talked before we went live that this is self-published. And what's so beautiful is typically a publisher owns the outside of the book and you own to some degree the inside of the book. Well, I wanted to own all of this. It's too personal of a story for me to argue about a cover. So this is a picture of Jack walking in Italy. And we had said, Jack, it was drizzling out. We're walking through his grandmother's hometown. And we said, hold the umbrella over your head. And that's what he did. And, this is 7 years ago. And I just happened to snap this picture. And then when I was thinking about the cover, what the cover could be, I was talking to some good friends of mine. I said, it's the umbrella. And it just sort of came into focus.
Yeah.
People ask about the title a lot, and it's actually not related to autism or Jack. It's related to my marriage, because I often say my husband Joe holds up half my sky when it's threatening to collapse. So to circle back to siblings, my youngest Henry is 15. He and Jack are probably most the most likely to sort of rub against each other.
Mm.
I often say there's a duality in kids like ours. There's their physical age and then their emotional spirit. And Jack lags more to maybe age 13 or so at 19 years old. There's another phenomenon we call leapfrogging, where a younger sibling leapfrogs over Jack in a milestone or development. And I will say it's painful for both. The most specific one I can think of is driving. When each of my younger kids, Rose drives now, began to drive. And I think for Henry and Jack, that leapfrogging experience has always been particularly painful. And so they shared a room forever. And I think the second part of that is Henry, up until recently, was incredibly loud. Just one of those human beings that doesn't modulate their voice.
Yes.
They engage in loud things. They own the room. He's actually since mellowed out in the past couple of years quite a bit, but I just think that unpredictability was hard for Jack. They say that kids like ours, or men like ours, I have to start saying young men like ours, can only match the highest regulatory system in the room. And that's very accurate for our family. I'm married to an Italian who is larger than life, and everything's a 12. Sometimes I'll say, we're really better at a 6. Can we just dial it back to a 6? And just talking to you right now, I'm putting the pieces together. This happens so often. Henry's regulatory system was always so high. And I think really looking back, Jack struggled to calibrate around him.
That makes so much sense.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about my two boys too. And that I I see that between my two boys, like Joseph and Jacob. I can so see that. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a little aha for me too.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating to see the way nervous systems
Yeah.
dictate so much for us.
Yeah. And it's so easy to forget that. I
Well,
do all the time. I'm like, oh yeah,
yeah,
that's what's really going on with Joseph. I need to just
right.
kind of get out of my, like, just come back to remembering, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day in, day out, right? And not, like, I hate to say that, but remember, oh my goodness, he's dealing with a lot.
Yes. Yes. And being curious about what that must be like. That's a question I ask a lot to anybody I can. 'Cause what is that like for you?
Yeah.
Such a simple question, but it
Yeah.
opens up such a dialogue. And I think, I learned along the way that when we're reactive, we're neither teaching nor learning. So when Jack's in a reactive state, he's not taking in any information. And when I'm reactive, which is knee jerk for me, I love to be reactive. I'm not changing anything.
Yeah, I relate to that too. Because yeah, I always think to myself, now, life has slowed down. My children are men now, 26 and 31, right? And I now can kind of take a breath and kind of watch more. I don't know, it's almost like watching a movie sometimes, but just really sitting back and taking it all in and really understanding more of
Mhm.
the dynamic and what maybe or not maybe what I did miss along the way. Because, we got to get our homework done. We got to da 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 da,
Yeah. Well, I talked a lot. So Jack hasn't lived here. It'll be 2 years this summer.
Yeah.
And I really thought, what will life be like for me? First, from a kind of creative point of view, my subject walked out the door. So,
I can relate.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
well, this might be it. This could be my peak. And also, I didn't mean for this to happen, but Jack certainly took up a lot of my time. There's an element I call autism management where you're just doing appointments and now I have a social security packet of information to fill out. Um, and and then just the day-to-day sort of motherhood. And I love how you describe that, because that's exactly what happened to me. I gained a sense of space to bring clarity to a lot around me.
Yeah, and it's such a great time, I think, getting a bit older and having what you just said, having that space to just kind of sit back, and then it's like all the dots connect, almost like, oh, now I get it, right?
Hmm.
I think Joseph also moved 2.5 hours away from home, later than Jack, but he was 29. And it was a very odd day, the day he moved out. Like, what is happening? And it was a bit of grief, but also a bit of joy. Like, okay, how is this going to work? How will I know if he needs me or not? Because Joseph's not the type of person that's going to call me. Uh,
Mm.
I won't know. You know,
Okay.
yeah, not unless it's something really serious. But I've often, you have to balance that letting go. Even with my neurotypical son, knowing how to be a mom now, because I'm still a mom.
Yes. Oh, I'm working that balance every day.
Yeah,
Especially I have an 18-year-old who's a delightful human, but there's this phrase called soiling the nest before
yeah.
they fly from the nest, and there's the little soiling going on.
I, I had some soiling
And
over
that's,
here.
I just name it. For me, I name everything, even if I only name it to myself. This is soiling of the nest. And that way
Yeah,
I
that's
don't engage. But to
yeah.
speak to your point, I call that untethering. And I think not enough attention is paid to the untethering process, particularly in the special needs community. And I invite parents to be curious about ways to take themselves more out of it. I've noticed, I continue to notice, um, some codependency amongst mothers, and I see it amongst mothers and their children, right? Only I can do this. He'll only do this if I'm around. I have to manage this. And I just invite people to sort of push back on that narrative a little bit, because there's more possible for them. And we went through, I describe untethering as a three-prong approach. There's the physical untethering, getting him to manage his medication, getting him to know how to interact with the doctor portal and refill. And we worked on all of that. Then there's this emotional untethering. So you say your Joseph wouldn't call you. I had the opposite problem, that when Jack left, it was 20 texts an hour.
Oh my
It was
goodness.
3 phone calls to check in, where Joe and I were like, I'm like, what have we done? At that point, he was maybe 12 emotionally. Like, we launched a 12-year-old into the world and expected him to behave like an 18 year old. So I learned that we had to disengage our frontal lobes. And I talk a lot about that in this book, because my visual for that is an actual visual with my hands. We had to move from a we to two eyes. And there was really specific steps that we took. Jack, I will not be reading texts until 3 o'clock this afternoon. And we slowly backed him off to 2 phone calls a week. And we used my oldest as a model. Look at Joseph. Do you remember? Joseph didn't call a lot. He didn't tell us everything he ate for dinner. And it was
I love that.
painful. And I write specifically about this one instance of the emotional untethering when Jack was still living here. Whenever I left, I was like his companion. We were in danger of becoming companions. And every time I left the house without him, our garage is connected to our kitchen. I pulled into the garage and he'd have the door open waiting for me. And it was like 2 parts endearing and 1 part like, I just want to sit and scroll on my phone, and like, I need to transition also. I read somewhere that it's very easy to trap bees in a glass jar. This is because when they're in there, they don't look up to the sky. They focus on the ground, and they focus on the walls around them. And that metaphor was so powerful to me. We were the bees. We were focused here, with the garage door and the waiting for me all the time. I didn't want him to be that. So I said, you know what? Start waiting for me inside the house. I'll come in to see you. This is emotional for me because it was really powerful that it took a year, for him to explain himself. So the skills we work hardest for are the ones we lose first under stress. Jack's is always his verbal ability. So it was a full year before he said to me, I always came out to see if you had groceries to bring in. So, yeah,
Oh,
and then you just think, what am I doing?
yeah, yeah. Oh, that is so like I just want to take a moment because that is so powerful on so many levels because that's well, I was about to say Joseph and I speak two different languages and I can tell when he has no idea what I'm talking about and I can tell when I have no idea what Joseph, I'm so sorry. I can you try again? Can you
Mm,
try again? And finally we're both saying the same thing. But how in the world would you ever know that? And to know that he was coming to just check to see if he could help you. Well, how,
I
to
know.
give yourself some grace as a mom, it, yeah,
Well, thank you. And I do believe I wish I had had that information, obviously, but I still don't know that it would have changed my tactic at all. I still think it was good for him to not always wait.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree totally, but it's just kind of like I'm thinking about your heart,
Yeah. Yes.
because I can relate to those moments in mine where, yeah, like what you said, like what am I doing? There's nobody to help me, direct me. I can't find ways, right? Maybe that's why we both do what we do,
Hmm.
share our stories. So hopefully that somebody who's listening really and truly just kind of goes, oh,
Yeah.
okay, it,
Yeah.
right?
It
What,
is so true. And there's no manual for any kind of motherhood. And then
no,
you add autism into the stratosphere of it all, and it certainly changes the game.
it
I
does.
I did take untethering even further, and this is new for me. It was when Jack was home last Christmas to the interfacing, I call it, right? So for so long, I spoke for Jack, I argued for Jack, I was his voice. And there's a really specific example. We were out to dinner with my oldest son and his girlfriend and my husband. And Jack ordered, but for himself, as he's done for years. But the server brought the wrong pizza. And he said, this isn't what I ordered. And I got this pit in my stomach just thinking, here comes the storm, right? And I actually was like leaning. I'm very conscious of my body movements. And I was leaning out of my chair, like ready, like, okay, I was going to fix this. And I forced myself to lean back and relax in my chair. And I forced myself to put my hands in my lap and just give it a moment. And that's all it took. He said, I'll try this. And if I don't like it, I will get dessert. And it was really a light bulb that I don't need to be in the middle anymore.
Yeah, wow. Okay. I hope anyone who's listening to that really grabs that, right? Because give them a chance, like because I'm was that mom. I was the mom. I micromanaged everything. It was just like, I just jumped in whenever, and he was perfectly capable.
Right.
Give,
And
give
to
him,
take it even a step further, now that we have young adults,
yeah,
I really am intentional about not infantizing him. And by
yes.
that I mean I started letting him pick out his own clothes. I had to really switch. I always called him big guy when we were in public. He is a big guy, right?
Yeah.
I stopped doing that. I don't want the world to see him as younger than he is. And so I think the other things I stopped micromanaging, I get this question a lot, is food, particularly in public. If we were at a barbecue, I would think to myself, I would never tell my oldest son he's had enough soda. or that's too many cookies. Because the end goal is to get them to connect the dots themselves. Well, I had 40 sodas and I don't feel good.
Right? Yeah.
You know, it's difficult to say what I'm about to say, but I can't do that forever. I didn't want to be in that role forever of getting Jack through the day. And so that can be hard for young moms to hear because you think, oh, I just want to do this forever, or I have to do this forever. You won't and you don't. There's other seasons for us out there.
I think that is great advice. There are other seasons, and it doesn't just when you're in the especially the very beginning of the journey, there's more of the unknown than what we can handle usually. And so you just live in the fight or flight, right? It's just fear, 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 fear. As I've coached enough moms now where I'm like, I already expect that we're going to be talking about all the things, the fear of the future, what's like what you're talking about, the letter that you wrote to your son Joseph about, what's going to happen to my child when I'm no longer here. I mean, yeah, it's horrifying, but there are seasons.
Yes.
And I do want to bring this up because I do think it's important. And if you're just newly diagnosed, you're probably not going to like this, but just hang on. You talk about how autism changed your family for the better.
Mm,
Can you talk about that?
absolutely. It was really in very specific, practical ways. It just drew us back to the basics. An autism diagnosis is really difficult to process and put all the pieces together for the future. I invite parents to consider it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to design your family the way that you want.
Mm.
For us, it looked like dinner at the table every night. We finally got Jack to sit through dinner, and that took some doing. It was for my husband, it was important that we had breakfast at his parents' on every Sunday, which became a real cornerstone of my kids' memories for their childhood. It was we name everything in our house. We make the covert overt, what's undercover obvious. So we came up with Adventure Sundays, and that was our family only. And every Sunday we took an adventure. And sometimes it was like a walk in the woods with egg salad sandwiches. Sometimes it was go to Boston for the day. Didn't always have to be extravagant.
Mhm.
And my kids remember that. It was a chance to really discover who we were. I couldn't have my kids in 3 different sporting activities. First of all, there was too many of them.
Yeah.
And that didn't serve Jack. It didn't
Mhm.
serve him as a human, as a brother or a son. And so we learned to say no in a culture that has not quite figured that out yet, particularly during childbearing years. It's unheard of to say that doesn't work for us right now, but they're very easy words.
To say, no, thank you. I think that's really shaping your family into, what it is, not what you want, you force it to be, right? I think, that's a lot of the conversations I have too, is like, well, if I'm not and there's nothing wrong, my youngest son played soccer, if I'm not a soccer mom, or if I'm not, you get into that comparison thing instead of being true to what actually is going on, to who everybody is, and respecting that. And man, there's nothing like those special days where you get to connect as a family in those moments. And yeah, that I think is beautiful. And I agree with you. I wish that there was more of that, and that moms learn how to say no and really be okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that idea. I also did dinners. We always sat at the table. It wasn't always easy,
Right. Or
but,
delicious.
but that was just something. And now, we as a family, it's just what we do, you know?
And we also, people ask a lot about puberty, and
Yeah.
we suffered through puberty for a while. I was picking him up at the school. It was the walk of shame past the carpool because he couldn't ride the bus home. It was all of that. We did everything. We took away TV. We yelled. We asked him what kind of person he was, who does this. We call that character assassination. When your kid did something wrong or has a messy room and you're like, what, who does this? And how are you ever gonna have a roommate? Who's going to marry you? You're such a pig. So it really moved me out of that space because it's not helpful.
Yeah.
We made a decision during puberty. Our home was a safe landing. Instead of him coming home and me already having talked to the teacher, being like, she said you did this and then you did this, and what is this? I let him come home and just be. And he would go up into my master bathroom and lay in the bathtub with all his clothes on and no water and just cocoon there. And I took my cues from that. He needed to shrink his world, and I was going to assist with that. And so it sort of trickled down to all my kids when they're riding out that very complicated time in their lives.
Mhm.
And I always tell parents, just bring it back to the simplest things.
Mhm.
A good blanket at night, avocados for the one who loves guacamole at the moment, right? Bring it back to life's details.
I love that. Yeah, I was just thinking there's so much that you say that I then have more questions. So definitely I want to for you to come back and do another episode. But before we really head to the end of our interview, I don't want to leave and not talk about what color is Monday, right? And someone I'm with has autism because first of all, I love those titles of your other two books. And then, of course, we've been discussing Half My Sky. So tell us about the other two books too. They sound great.
Well, it's so funny. What color is Monday? Jack sees the days of the week as color. And it's not, people often ask if it's is called synesthesia. You can tell I had a lisp as a child because synesthesia is still very difficult for me. It's not quite that because the days of the week and the colors change. And my understanding with people who have the other kind, it's locked in. So I was on the phone with my good friend Audrey, and I said, I think I'm going to call the book Thursday's Purple. And she said, I think you should call it What Color is Monday? And it was just, I had a guy recently tell me he loves that title so much it makes him angry.
Yeah, that I mean, it's great.
It's a
It's
good title, but I can't take credit for it. So that is, I worked with a very small publisher on that. It was his first publishing project. He lived in my town. He wanted nonfiction from New England writers. And my husband read about him in the paper and said, hey, you should try this, which was sort of my first vote of confidence towards writing on a more serious level. It takes place from the day Jack was diagnosed all the way up until when he's 8 years old. And it's just sort of chronicle of our family and our marriage and kind of a little behind the scenes, if you will. And I opened that with a letter to my younger self the day Jack was diagnosed. Then a larger publishing house, Jessica Kingsley Publishers, asked to republish it. So in order to get it from my first publisher, I promised him a book of all my most successful blogs. I have blogged every Monday for 20, no, I'm not 20, 11 years. For 11 years, every single Monday, new content, not guest content, every day, every week. So I took my sort of most popular and I combined them into a book with some new material, and that became Someone I'm With Has Autism. And
That's
then,
a great name though, too. I mean, all three of your books, I just like, wow, that's those are really good.
well, it's funny, that one came from a blog post that I was speaking with a woman who helped train our dog, Wolfie, years ago. And she said, when my mother had Alzheimer's, we had these little business cards made up. So when I took her to get her hair cut or somewhere and she kind of fell off track with the conversation, I could give the person the card and they would understand what was happening. I said,
Mhm.
that is brilliant, because it was at the point in time where me saying, oh, he has autism, sometimes triggered Jack. So I did have them made. They're so cute. The first time I gave one to a woman, Jack was asking her what she knew about the Holocaust. And she said, she looked at it and she said, but who has autism? Who is autism? What is this? And I thought, oh, that backfired.
Oh
Yes. And then Half My Skies I mentioned earlier, that one I can take credit for. I do love that. It almost turned into this tangerine sky. And if anybody reads it, the last chapter, you'll understand why the word tangerine might make its way into there. But this book is really a lot about marriage. It's sort of our story as a couple, and it's just seems so fitting to have Joe be related to the title.
So, before we move on from your three beautiful books that I'm definitely going to be purchasing, by the way, are they available on Amazon? I
They
was wondering.
are Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and some smaller bookstores, and Target.
Hey, if you're in Target, that's pretty amazing. It's one of my favorite places to dilly-dally
I'm
around.
not in Target. That is the major coup to get your physically in, but you can order me online and Walmart. So
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay, so, and we'll get into more about where people can find you and all that in just a minute. But before we go, I did want to ask you, because I love asking all the guests that are on Mother's Guide, what your biggest lessons are or best advice for other moms on this autism journey that we're on.
I get asked that a lot, and often around the IEP table, and what services are most meaningful and help get Jack to this point. And my answer is always the same. You're trying to raise a whole child, and that does not spring up off a conference table or out of a report. So focus on the things that matter to you. My husband wanted to teach him to pray. It was important to us he could sit at a restaurant, learn how to forgive people, figure out how to cheer someone up after a bad day, how to pick out a gift when your cousin has her first baby. All of those skills are just as important for building a meaningful life. So don't tunnel vision and narrow down on the academic or the service side necessarily. And then the second part to that is just do all the things I didn't do. Too often I saw the diagnosis before I saw the boy. So I tell parents, inhale their heads when you're drying them off after a bath, and split a cookie before dinner if people are hungry. Get down on the floor and listen to that Elmo song, even if it's the 800th time. Those are the things you'll never ever regret.
Yeah, I love that because it is such a reality of hearing the Elmo song over or whatever it is that Joseph had his favorites as well. I love that advice. It is precious. It is enjoying them. Not, yeah.
I often say when it comes to autism and motherhood, the moment where you stand will not last forever, even when it feels as though it will. It simply moves on.
Yeah, I'm soaking that in because that is so true. And I wished I would have had that advice and known everything that you just said. I think young Bridget would have been a lot happier human for sure. So, is there anything else you want to mention before we go?
I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It's been great.
Oh, I think too. I knew that this was going to be a really great interview. And again, I have more questions that we'll take care of in another episode. Where can people find you, your work?
I blog every Monday at carriecariello.com. I have a nice Facebook community. It's not the biggest fit community you'll ever see, but we have a good time. And that is at Carrie Cariello on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, Carrie_Cariello. And I have a subscriber page for a little more behind the scenes. I sometimes show us cooking and things like that, so you can subscribe there. And then my books are readily available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walgreens, and Target.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carrie, for being on a Mother's Guide. And again, we'll set something up where hopefully you can come back. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Mother's Guide Through Autism, if you enjoyed this interview, please like, please subscribe so that we can reach as many moms as possible to spread hope and knowledge and inspiration. See you in the next episode.